Derby County are in the news again, and this time it's a report from John Percy. And it's a very, very devastating report for Derby County fans to read. It reads of a terrible January window and some problems that have come up after the arrival of John Eustace, as well as changes which are set to take place over the course of the next few months. There's also a little bit of talk about investment, but we'll get into all of that in this video. And let's start off with talking about that failure in the January window. Now, I'll put on screen the pieces of the article talking about the January window so that you can read through it with me. Now, John Percy states that it has been an extremely frustrating year for Derby County, with the January window being a huge headache. Obviously, we know that Derby County failed in January. We've spoken about it time and time again on this channel, but it goes on to tell us all that in mid-January, Derby County agreed a £2 million deal for Man City's young midfielder Jacob Wright, and the deal collapsed because the Man City hierarchy didn't think the football that we played at Derby County was good enough. And that isn't a surprise. We've spoke about it. Now, it says that Derby were left stunned when Wright then agreed to join Norwich on loan. A load of other deals fell through as well, including one for Kelechi Iheanacho, who went on to join Middlesbrough, West Brom's John Swift, as well as deals for Dijksteel from Middlesbrough and Dan Barlaser. Now, obviously, we've spoke about the January window a few times over the course of this channel, over the course of the last month or so, and how much of a failure it's been. And even if you go to my video from this morning where I spoke about why Derby County only have themselves to blame, this just continues to add to that fact. Now, we now know that Derby County had money to spend in January because we missed out on a deal for Oscar Frullo, which was about £3.5 million. We had a deal agreed with Man City for Jacob Wright, which was £2 million. And we had deals in for Iheanacho, John Swift, Dan Barlaser and Dijksteel. Now, Iheanacho won't have been a cheap loan deal. John Swift won't have been a cheap deal. Dan Barlaser would probably have been around the £1 million mark. So you're looking there at probably another £8 million that we hadn't spent, let's say, for example, right? So now the blame moves away from David Clowes. And they have to go back to that common saying, the suitability for the style of football. Now, when players turn you down, and even young players, when they're turning you down, and then the older heads are turning you down as well, it becomes a bit of a problem for Derby County. And that's probably the reason why Paul Warne was then sacked subsequently after the window. But there is the problem. Derby County waited until the window was closed to make that change after multiple deals fell through. Now, if you go back to, obviously, I think it was the Leeds United game, away from home, I said that Paul Warne needs to go, and once I heard the comments that he'd made afterwards as well, I said he has to go. And that's just the situation which needed to happen for Derby County to be able to move on to more stable ground and to bring in better quality players. We knew it wasn't going to be an instant change. We knew that it was going to take time for things to build, and the problem that we've found is that Eustace has come into a squad that's got no confidence, is devoid of ideas, and doesn't really have the quality. Now, there's a lot for Derby County to improve on over the course of the next few months as we head towards a potential relegation back to League One, which I believe has essentially already been confirmed with the gap that is there and the games remaining. So, obviously, let me know your thoughts down below. We're going to get into the next bit about Eustace and Derby County. Now, Derby County approached John Eustace on Friday, February the 7th, and negotiations were initiated, and Blackburn offered the stance that he wouldn't be going. And the buyout clause was £500,000 for Eustace and his backroom staff. I'll make sure I have the piece of the article up on screen now for you. But talks were drawn out and ended up going up until the Tuesday, where Eustace was only able to watch the second half of the Oxford United game. Now, there's no love lost between the two people. As you can imagine, Blackburn won't see it as a great thing that a relegation side have taken their manager off them, but that's one of those things. Now, obviously, the first thing that John Eustace has got to do this season is try and keep Derby County in the Championship. Now, will that happen? I think it's looking very unlikely, but I don't think it's his fault. Now, obviously, his first three games have been defeat: 4-0 to QPR, 1-0 versus Millwall, and 1-0 versus... Was it 1-0 versus Middlesbrough? Yeah, I think it was. And it is a great appointment for the long term. And I think when we do go down, if we go down, whatever, I do think he'll have a way to get us back out of the division. And I think the players that we bring in will show that as well. Now, obviously, John Percy goes on to discuss Eustace at Derby County, and he's apparently been arriving at 7 a.m, leaving at 7 p.m. He's got a clear philosophy and method of play, which is key to his high attention to detail, and they've employed a number of brand new analysts in order to cope with the demands of John Eustace, which for me isn't surprising. We had 3 analysts under Paul Warne, and realistically the job could have been done by one. From my personal experience of when I was there, it would have been a lot of work for one analyst, but realistically there wasn't a great deal going into it. So hopefully under John Eustace he's making more advantage of those analysts that he has and things like that. Now, I have to just point out that anybody who's sort of discrediting analysts and things like that because of the performances we're putting in and things like that, please don't, because they are told what to look for, what to look at, what clips they're allowed to use and stuff like that by whoever the manager is. Now, whether that was Paul Warne, Richie Barker, John Eustace, whatever, they all have their own way of doing things, and that's what will now be getting implemented under John Eustace. Now, soon after Eustace was appointed, he started putting... There's loads of TV screens around the training ground. I don't know how many of you have been in Moor Farm, but there's TV screens everywhere. And John Eustace has insisted of having patterns of play and game examples on the big screen for the players to look at. And I think that's great for John Eustace. Now, obviously, while we're talking about John Eustace and his training methods and things like that, we have to talk about a familiar face that has returned to training with Derby County, and that is Jeff Hendrick. Now, whether he signs or not is yet to be announced, but we'll have to wait and see. But Eustace is sort of made it clear that we have to be in all together to be able to move forward, and completely agree with that. And last week, according to John Percy, he took the players and staff out for a meal at Morley Hayes, which is great. And then obviously the introduction of Steve Round, who is working as a consultant for up to 4 days a week with Derby County. Now, obviously, these things are incredible and great for Derby County to be able to move forward. Will John Eustace be able to keep us in the division? It's looking very unlikely unless we suddenly sort of find a switch, which I don't think we're going to find. And if it starts on Saturday versus Blackburn, I've sort of admitted defeat to relegation now. You lot can all have your say on whether you think Derby is staying up or going down, but it's going to be a difficult task. Now, we're going to get on to talking about the Sporting Intelligence Unit. If you remember, back in the summer, Derby County appointed Ed Smith and Mo Babbitt to the Sporting Intelligence Unit, which then included the head of sports science, the head of medicine, and the head of talent acquisition and things like that, although it was called head of recruitment at the time. Well, now Derby County are, as we've spoken about a few times over the course of recent weeks on the channel, are looking to appoint a head of talent acquisition to go hand in hand with the head of talent identification, which is Mark Thomas. Now, the aim for this position is to bridge the gap between recruitment, sports science, football operations, and Eustace will obviously be heavily involved in the process to appointing this member of staff. Now, Paul Warne was heavily involved in the process to bring in Mark Thomas. That deal doesn't seem to have worked very well, although I can't put much blame on Mark Thomas for anything that's going on, because I know that he doesn't really have much of a say. He can put players forward and things like that, but ultimately it all falls on, it fell on Paul Warne to be able to pick players to bring in, and then fell on Stephen Pearce to get the deals through the line in terms of negotiations. Now, when it comes to style of playing things, that all then falls down on the player or the club that is allowing the player to come to us on loan, etc. Now, Derby claim that the Sporting Intelligence Unit will be a major asset over the course of the next few years. Now, I believe that it will be. I don't know if Babbitt and Smith are the right people to be leading it, considering that they're cricket guys, but we'll have to see how that works. Now, they've been working together to analyse the data-led strategy across the club, first team and academy, including team performance, medicine, science, and future signings. Now, the big thing will be is that we won't really see how good this unit is until the summer. And obviously you will have seen the bits of article on screen. Eustace is already working on targets for next season, whichever division we're in, which obviously, like, that makes complete sense. I've spoken about that a few times already. And if we pull off the escape, it'll probably be one of the greatest escapes in Championship history. Now, David Cloud remains fully committed, and the most recent accounts suggest he's inputting around £30 million of his own money to fund it, and that is okay. And we know that he's covering costs, because that's literally the bare minimum he has to do. Clouds hasn't made any secret of his desire for external investment. Obviously, talks are ongoing with numerous parties, according to John Percy, with sources close to the scene growing confident that that will be secured in the near future. Now, obviously, Derby County need financial assistance, and the hopes of that will be drastically higher should we stay in the division. Now, I personally am sort of in that position where, as I've mentioned a few times in this video already, I do believe we probably aren't going to stay up. But if we can sort of get sort of boots on the ground, deals on paper, written up to sort of say, well, we'll give you this in League One, this in the Championship, or we'll pay this much for it in the Championship, this much for it in League One, then I think Derby County can put themselves in a good place. Now, obviously, over the course of the next few weeks, we face some difficult tasks, Blackburn, Coventry, Plymouth and things like that. And if Derby can pull off the escape, it's going to be based on our home form. And that all sort of falls on whether John Eustace can turn it around. Now, whatever happens now or whatever happens in the summer is always going to be a very, very interesting call. Whether John Eustace then chooses to stick around or not is going to be sort of that most interesting conversation, because Derby County obviously will find themselves a division below. It'll be John Eustace's first relegation, the first time he's been manager outside of the Championship since he left Kidderminster. So it's a very, very interesting situation that Derby County find ourselves in. Will we be able to turn it around over the course of the next few weeks? I don't necessarily believe so. But with investment closing in, with John Eustace getting his stall set for whatever happens over the course of the next few weeks to get ready for next season, I think Derby County are in a really good place off the pitch. Maybe not on the pitch, but off the pitch, I certainly think we're getting ourselves into sort of the best position we could be in. Now, realistically, there's still people that need to be moved on, and we won't ignore that fact. Stephen Pearce is one of them, who I believe that some fans will never move on until he's moved on. Now, I believe that won't happen until a new owner is in place. Whether you agree with that or not, it's completely your decision, but that's just my personal opinion. Now, obviously, Derby County will hope to stay in the Championship this season, and with obviously Jeff Hendrick training, with investment coming, and the situation sort of getting better behind the scenes, will the players find some confidence? Because that is what we're dying for. Now, you can obviously let me know your thoughts down in the comments. If you have not done so already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on that notification bell. Hit the like button as well so you can stay tuned for all of my latest Derby County content. It's going to be a very, very interesting one over the course of the next few weeks. You can let me know your thoughts down in the comments.